Hi, welcome. Good to see you again. You know, I'm 82 and I'm a native of Los Angeles, so I've got some good stories to tell you, and this is one of them. There was a restaurant and it was called Perino's, and it was a very, very, very fine French restaurant, exquisite. I never ate there and my family never ate there, but it was an exquisite restaurant. You'll have to trust me. Well, they moved, I think that they originally were in maybe Beverly Hills, and they moved to Wilshire Boulevard, and just up the street from where I lived. And I guess it was because it was a much larger lot. Anyway, so it was the kind of restaurant where Frank Sinatra would put his martini on the piano, and it would stain the piano, but he'd sing. Betty Davis had her own banquette. Cole Porter wrote a song on the back of the menu. Let's see, who else would go there? Let's see, Charlie Chaplin. So you can see it was what they used to call a watering hole. That means that people used to drink there. But it was really very, very fine French cuisine. And you're going to say, well, why are you telling me about that? Aha, the story continues. My mother, we lived down the street, but up the street lived my mother's best friend, or at least one of them, and her name was Mary. And Mary and my mother were, I think that they were like Ethel and Lucy. They'd get into all sorts of scraps and do all sorts of creative things together. And her daughters were my best friends. And we'd ride bikes together, play jacks together, play cards together. We were just really good buddies. And in fact, it was at Mary's house that I would have Christmas Eve, and she'd make hot chocolate, and we'd put crystals all over the Christmas trees. Anyway, you can see that we were very connected. Well, Mary had a gentleman friend, and the gentleman friend would come, I don't know if he came once a week or twice a week, I don't remember, but we all stayed away when Mary had a gentleman friend. So this gentleman friend used to eat at Perino's and loved the food at Perino's. And in fact, one of his favorite foods at Perino's was a cheesecake. Well, eventually, this man and the chef got to be good friends. And he gave this man his recipe to a fabulous cheesecake. Well, this man gave the recipe for the fabulous cheesecake to Mary. And Mary, who is a great cook, and I don't know if her cooking was so great because it was different than my mother's, or if it was just great. I remember that she used to make an incredible orange cake. You know the one, do you remember Sunset Magazine? I'm really going back in history, aren't I? But anyway, Sunset Magazine used to have a fabulous orange cake recipe, and Mary would make it, and I thought it was delicious. Anyway, going back to the cheesecake that this man got the recipe to, gave to Mary, and Mary gave to my mother. And my mother and Mary decided, we're never giving this recipe to anybody. Now, if you think about it, it's kind of like this was pre-Cheesecake Factory. In fact, I've never eaten Cheesecake Factory's cheesecake because I knew that my mother's was so much better. But Mary and my mother decided nobody's getting this cheesecake recipe. They were thinking that one day they'd have a business and that they would have a cheesecake business. Well, the years go by and my mother gets boxes for them. She gives them as gifts. She gives them to, weddings, funerals, brisses, birthdays, you name it, and you got a cheesecake. And everybody treasured my mother's cheesecake recipes, but nobody got the recipe. Nobody knew anything about the recipe. Well, my mother was going back east, and she was going back east to some family holiday. And her girlfriend that she played cards with, her girlfriend Lillian Hoffman, said, would you please visit my son? I'm so worried about him. He's in New York. He's studying to be an actor. He has no money, and he's so skinny, and would you please go and visit him? So my mother goes back east, and she says she's got to visit her friend Lillian's son. So she buys a corned beef sandwich. She wants to fatten him up, and she makes a cheesecake. She takes the train into New York City, climbs up 4 flights of stairs to bring a corned beef sandwich and her own homemade cheesecake to Lillian's son, Dusty. She comes home, and I call her and say, "Mom, how are you doing?" She said, "Fine, everything's fine." "How was your trip?" "It was great." "How is the family?" "Everybody's fine. Everything's going well." And I said, "Well, what did you do there?" And she says, "Well, you know, I went into New York City to bring some food to Lillian's son." I said, You went to New York City and you went on the subway?" And she said, "Yes, you know, I was really worried about him. Lillian said that he was not, that he was skinny, that he was, skinny, that he needed food. So I bought him a corned beef sandwich and I brought him a cheesecake so that I had food for Dusty." And my mother's going on about Dusty this and Dusty that. And she was saying, going on. And I said, "Wait a second. You're talking about Dusty and you brought food to Dusty?" "Yeah." And I said, "This is Lillian Hoffman's son?" "Right." And I said, "This Dusty, could he be Dustin Hoffman?" And she said, "Right, it's Dusty Hoffman. And he's so skinny, he really needs fattening up." And I said, "Mother, this is Dustin Hoffman. Dustin, what does it matter? He's skinny, he needs food, doesn't matter, Dustin. I said, "But he's got an Academy Award." Big deal. My mother didn't realize who Dusty Hoffman was. And I got the biggest kick out of it. I don't even know if she ever saw the movie, but she did give him her cheesecake and a corned beef sandwich. And Lillian, his mother, was so thrilled that my mother was, fattening up her Dusty. Well, that's how good my mother's cheesecake is. So another few years go by, and my mother is ill, and I go into her home and I find the cheesecake recipe. And about this time, well, it wasn't, it was years later after my mother passed away. And I asked my sister and I asked my sisters if it was okay if I told the story about my mother's cheesecake and if I printed the recipe. And we decided that it would be a tribute to Grandma Anna and to which is my mother, Grandma Anna, to publish her recipe. I used to be very active on my blog, and I told this story, and I told the story, and I printed the recipe for my mother's cheesecake. Well, kind of God bless the internet. I get an email maybe a few years later, and it's from Jane Figueros. Now, Jane Figueros is the coach for the British Olympic aquatic team. And she wrote to me to thank me for my mother's recipe. And she told me that when the squad ate well and exercised really well, that she would make my mother's cheesecake for the team, and that they loved it, and it was their favorite thing to eat. Not only that, when donors would come to visit the aquatic team, she would make a cheesecake for them. So this cheesecake has gone around the world. And it turns out that Tom Daley, who won the gold medal at the British Olympics, I think this was for double diving, or it was for two of them diving together. His favorite treat that he has made, or that I don't know if he makes it or somebody or Jane makes it for him, but his favorite treat when he's been really, really good and really had fabulous workouts and eaten really, really well is my mother's cheesecake. Well, I love that story, and I was so grateful to Jane for thanking me. And I must admit that I now watch Tom Daly, everything that he does. And I'm so grateful that it's Tom's favorite treat, and it's my mother's secret recipe cheesecake. So I'm going to put it in the show more. Maybe I should also put it in the first comment and pin it there. Or maybe if you want to, go to my blog, apartfrommyart.com, and you'll see the cheesecake recipe. So I just had to tell you that story and share it with you because it's meant so much to me to see the secret recipe that was a secret for, I don't know, maybe at least 40 years, be put on the internet and see it go so far and make so many people happy. And so many people have written to me and said how they love the recipe. They made it for Christmas. They made it for Easter. They make it for birthdays. They make it for any occasion. And it brings so much joy to so many people. It's my mother's cheesecake recipe. I hope you enjoy it.